for a drink after meeting you on the street there.
Well, I might have a drink, but where's it to go?
Well, I think I'm entitled to have a drink with you, since I haven't seen you in 14 years.
Oh, sure. Glad to see you, too, behind that time.
I mean, when I had you, you were, a commando.
Oh, yeah?
Tell me, baby, just why did you square up?
Everything was getting rough out there, and the way they're killing girls and taking their money. That's the reason I squared up behind that. I'm scared of dying. Might not wake up next morning. Sometimes you're scared, trust your own man, he might put a pillow over your head or something. So that's the way life is.
Slim tells his girls they can leave whenever they get ready. But they don't want to leave because he's too good to them. But they must get the money. Otherwise, you're fired or something like that. Can you imagine a pimp firing a whore?
My total image of myself was that I was some sort of black, evil Swingali.
When you look at old pictures of him, you see this face, this mask he wore. There was no emotion whatsoever. His foot had no problem finding its way to a woman's ass.
Iceberg had no hesitation at all about taking 2 lines of cocaine so he could slap a prescription on.
Brutality was the name of the game. First of all, you'd spell out your rules and regulations. And if any of those rules were broken, you had to punish them.
He would visualize being cold as a refrigerator, being cold as a freezer, where he would be able to guard his emotions against rival pimps, cops, his women. They were never able to read him.
I've had hundreds of women. I've never admitted to one that I ever had a problem or that anything worried me. And that's the secret.
He said he was a psychopath. He said he got a thrill out of degrading women and hurting them, brutalizing them, keeping a relentless psychological and physical pressure on them.
I wanted that thrill, that voluptuous sensation of controlling a stable of women.
He had to grab that intellect, grab that spirit, grab that hope. And I don't think there was anybody better at it than him.
He said the hardest thing for me to do every day was to say something to my stable that would confound their mind to mentally keep them in check.
At the end of the day, there's only one game. It's you either work for somebody or you have people work for you. Pimping is no different, If you really break it down to the lowest level, it's using your finesse and your charisma to convince somebody to do what you want them to do.
You can't be a normal person, not and succeed in that life. And you've got to be absolutely unflappable. What you do, literally, is play God.
When you have 5 or 6 hoes, every one of them thinks their man is God. He said, that's why you don't have sex with them very often. You got to be God. And hey, if she can touch God anytime she wants, then he's not God anymore.
The life of a pimp is unremitting tension and pressures. A pimp lives on the precipice of disaster. I think he's the most hated and feared creature of the underworld.
All of us, honey, all of us.
To try to actually control a female who's basically a criminal, a robber, a thief, to get that to operate under your motivation is not an easy thing to do. You know what I'm saying? So I tell cats, I'm like, you do better selling drugs. At least a key of dope won't wake up in the middle of the night and kill you for something you said to it earlier that day.
Holding a stable getter requires the pimp to keep each individual member of the stable in apparent competition.
Because of the nature of the prey. And I don't have to tell you gentlemen how cunning they are. The enemy
your word got to be law. Even if you tell that female, I'm not gonna accept you or charge you or give you any love until you give me my money, you got to mean that. You gotta keep your gang live and let them know that you down and that you about your money.
It's a skull game. Pimping is a skull game. It's a game of manipulative psychology.
And believe me, to really be a pimp takes a lot. The average man walking up down the street, he may be under the impression that he can pimp, but when he's put to the test, he'll flunk.
My brother, my older brother Shabazz, had when he got out of jail, he changed his name from Charles to Shabazz. He became a 5%er, and you know, there was Qurans and a bunch of, you know, Islamic literature, and then every Iceberg Slim book was right next to it.
It was December 1945. For 7 years, I devoted myself to getting hip to that pimp's book. I had thought and acted like a black god. 6 months later, Sweet called me. He said, "Berg, I got a wire the FBI is quizzing whores. They're trying to build a 5 or 6 count rap against you."
He's picked up for violating the Mann Act. 2 of his women, his bottom woman of many years, Phyllis, his first woman, turned state's evidence against him. He was incarcerated in Leavenworth, the alma mater of Machine Gun Kelly, Bugs Moran, Al Capone.
Iceberg Slim writes about a psychiatrist in the 1940s that he encountered in prison. The psychiatrist came from a psychoanalytical background and believed that pimps, particularly black pimps, had a real hatred of their mothers.
The person that had the greatest effect on him psychologically was his mother. He didn't want to keep hurting his mother, and yet there was part here that was a divided soul, because there were also parts of him that were angry at his mother and held things against his mother, which really psychologically had some things to do with the way he treated other women and his utter disrespect for women.
My reputation coming up, before I got street poison, all of my mother's friends, all of my associates' mothers and fathers, they all thought I was the most charming, the sweetest. They used to talk about, "Oh, your son is so sweet. Oh, he's such a gentleman." You see what I mean? So to get from that A to the horrific Z of pimping required more of me than it did the average person.
Which I think played out in his very, very direct experiences with some of the girls in his stable, including the girl who he beat violently and at the same time wanted to nurture and hold and hug.
But I always had that sucker streak in me. I don't mean that it compromised my pimping, but it was always there.
You can't just dog a woman out and just gorilla pimp a bitch to death. There's got to be some compassionate pimping in there, some soft side, some tender loving pimping in there. Because if you constantly with the women, you got to have a natural feeling for them. They getting you money, you respecting them, you actually being a father figure to them.
28 years old, he's released from Leavenworth, he's back on the street, flat on his ass. So he automatically, his first thought is like, okay, I need to get my pimp game back up.
He has no other alternative but to turn to strong arm robbery. And within a month, bam, he's back in the slammer. He's sentenced to the Cook County House of Corrections for a year. They put him on the coal pile. Never done a hard day's work in his life. Pimp on the coal pile is like oil and water. So, Good Friday, 1947, he escaped.
He's a fugitive from justice. He's running all over the Midwest with 8 prostitutes. And he's an addict of heroin and cocaine.
Did you make a lot of money?
Oh, But where'd it go? In my arm? In a blizzard of cocaine? Up my nose? All kinds of clothes? Spinning it across the bar, in cabarets?
Dope is maybe one of the greatest pimps to ever live. Because anybody who uses dope and gets hooked on dope, you're a hoe. And the dope is pimping you.
When you're in the life, you never realize that you're going to get old. That never occurs to you because the drugs keep you in a trance.
By the late 1950s, he's got his girls in whorehouses, he gets busted, they run his fingerprints and find out he's an escaped convict.
His run in the game is over. He's sentenced back to the House of Corrections. He does 9 months in solitary confinement.
I looked around my new home. It was a tight box designed to crush and torture the human spirit. I raised my arms above me. My fingertips touched the cold steel ceiling. I stretched them out to the side. I touched the steel walls. The mattress cover was stained and stinking from old puke and crap. It wasn't just the cell. It was the sights and sounds of the misery and torment on the row. At the end of the 4th month, my skull was shaking on my shoulders like I had palsy.
He said that he would have to do things to strengthen his mind to keep from going crazy.
His writing may have actually begun in that prison world, in that setting, where he started creating stories, whether about his own life or fictional ones.
He said, I had to play mental games with myself and I had to have certain conversations to just keep me going. He said, because I was determined that the man was not going to break me.
I could just lay right down. I'll tell you, children, I could lay right down.
He had a lot to cope with. His best friend, Joe Party Time Evans, was killed. Baby Bell was dead.
He gets a letter from his mother and that she's very sick and that he needs to get out to Los Angeles.
I had come to a decision in that awful cell. I was through with pimping and drugs. I had found out that pimping is for young men, the stupid kind. I got insight that perhaps I could never have hoped to get outside. I could see the terrible pattern of my life. Mama might die in California at any time. I had to get to her before she died. I had to convince her I loved her. I had to get there as much for myself as for her.
Here he is, he's struggling, trying to keep his sanity. And during this time, he finds out they may tack on more time. He may not get out when they tell him that he's supposed to be released.
In order to secure his freedom on the day that he is supposed to be released, he writes a letter to the warden in which he makes a legal-sounding plea for his release.
Using the pen and the paper to get somewhere in life for the first time was cathartic for him. This is when he became a writer, in effect, and that writing then and later on enabled him to leave the penitentiary, enabled him to leave the life of crime behind. And so through writing, he really did change his life.
Writers are born and not created. So that genius gene has always been there somewhere inside you. You just take something to trigger it.
He says, I hated being in the steel casket where they locked me away, but they saved my life. Because if I had tried to continue on, I wouldn't have lived.
He said, so I knew that I was going to leave the street life alone and do whatever I had to do to straighten up and lead a different kind of life.
Love and happiness make you do right. Love and happiness make you do right. Love and happiness make you do right.
Los Angeles becomes the end point of his journey because he's trying to get back to Mama.
I had no one except Mama. My coming to